Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special Free Cheese Podcast, Spoilercast. I am your host, Matt Sellner, joined by Joe Dix.
Hi.
Hello. Weird being on the other end of this. But yes. I have played Final Fantasy VII Remake. Joe has played Final Fantasy VII Remake. You should have played Final Fantasy VII Remake by this point because it is so damn good. But before we get into all the goodness, Joe, how you doing?
Doing pretty good, dude. It's been a little bit since I beat this game, but I'm still thinking about it a whole heck of a bunch. I think the other thing, well, I should ask you how you're doing. How are you doing?
Oh, fine. Another day. It's weird doing this on a different day than we regularly do.
Yeah, and I didn't move seating from where I sit for work, so it's throwing me off. But no, I mean, you said that I've played the game, you've played the game, and the listeners played the game, or should have played the game by now, but they should have played the game by now because this is, as titled, the Final Fantasy VII Spoilercast. So if you're listening to this and you have not played the game, you should not be listening to this because we're going to go all over the place with spoilers. I think obviously we'll spoil this game, but Matt's ready to fucking throw back to 1997 and just...
Yeah, Square Enix has decided to put us in a unique spot where they've released one part of a multi-part game, so we have to then question what's coming next. And the only way to do that is look back on the source material of the 3-disc PlayStation 1 game. I think you let it off. You got the spoiler warning out of the way. So my first question, I'm just going to start it off. Thoughts on the game. Now, yes, we've talked about it on the podcast at length, but never diving into the critical details we want to stay away from.
Yeah, we had to keep it at bay. I think overall, I talked about it, and this is going to be kind of retreading some of the same ground here. So I apologize for you, because you know, but also for people who've heard me say it over and over again. But I've always had a weird relationship with Final Fantasy VII, back to its original release, because I had a super good friend at the time who loved these types of games, loved playing RPGs, and I would go over to hang out and play and expect that we'd be playing Smash Brothers or whatever the hell else we were playing. I guess Smash Brothers would have been some years later, but whatever. We always played multiplayer stuff, and then I'd go over and he'd be in the middle of the original Final Fantasy VII. And I can't interact with that or really do much with that, so it would be a lot of me having to sit silently because you can't talk while cutscenes are it was just all of that. So I obviously
the story you can't talk during the story, but there's no dialogue.
I think also he might have been a little I don't know, I might have been asking questions or probably complaining, or who knows. The details are a little murky, but I remember him just getting mad whenever he was playing that game and I was around. I shouldn't have been there. I don't even know why the fuck I went over there, but either way. So I just, for years, it always kind of, I thought about the game and just had negative connotations toward it. And then when it became more accessible through PlayStation Network, and I grabbed it for PSP or PS3 or something, I still, I could just never, get far. And I by that point, I had played other Final Fantasies by the time I was playing it, 7, the original, for the first time. Just never got super far with it. So when this remake was announced, I was excited from the outsider perspective. I was like, hey, this is really cool because I know a lot of people love this. And I know that if it were, to a lot of people, Final Fantasy VII was my Symphony of the Night, right? It's just the pinnacle of all that ever was and could be and will ever be. So I could appreciate it from that perspective, but personally it never affected me. And then we saw more of it get shown off a little bit. Then we heard the delays with the CyberConnect stuff, and then Square was taking it back internally or whatever. And then we saw that trailer. Well, I guess really it wasn't until we saw the stuff last E3 that I was kind of hell yeah. And then even then, I played the demo 2 months ago and was just I don't think I'm going to buy this. And then on a fucking whim, just did. I think because Resident Evil 3 Remake ended up being so kind of... Yeah, it was just I think you could beat it in like 4 or 5 hours maybe. So I was just not. I don't know, but yeah. So I had the money and I was like, I'll buy it. And anyway, that was a really long way of saying that I really like this game, because I went into it with not low expectations, but just kind of like no expectations, and without the fervor of somebody who's been dreaming of this since they were 8. You know what I mean? When I was 8, I was mad that this game existed.
Yeah, it's
what
really
about you?
It's really weird because with me, with Final Fantasy VII, it is a big part of me growing up with a PlayStation 1. I remember getting it at the very same time as Fighting Force 1. They were both $20. It was already the greatest hit at this point. So I got it pretty late, but I didn't know anything about Final Fantasy. I just know my friend had a demo of it. You would go through it. I like the turn-based thing. I kind of like the Scorpion. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. There's some decent music here. And then, we couldn't really go past it. And it was so bizarre because I don't know if I owned a game that was multiple disc at this point. I don't think Gran Turismo was multiple disc until 2, and I didn't own 2. I think I just had 1. And it was just a big case for 1 disc. So it was just bizarre to me that this thing had 3 discs, and I tried to put in the second disc and cheat, but it wouldn't let me. I was like, shit, all this stuff. But yeah, it's so crazy that it's such a big part of me remembering the PlayStation 1 that I never really got past. I mean, I've gotten past Midgar a few times, but like the farthest I ever made it was right past the Gold Saucer in Cosmo Canyon. And here I'm just going to jump right in when Barrett meets his brother. So like,
whoa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I remember that boss fight and getting very stuck on it, and there was not a good place for me to grind, and I just got frustrated, and I just want to drop the game. And I will always remember that specific spot and story beat of where I stopped, but I've never gotten back to it, even to this day. But still, the amount of times I tried to get back to that day, to try to get into it, and I've seen the story of Midgar, and now is at the point where I've seen the story of Midgar so many times that part of the game is kind of boring despite it being really good. So it's just tedious and annoying to get through and have to grind at the levels because this game is very hard. Actually, it's considered the easiest one, but for me back then it was very hard. So yeah, it's just with all that, the fact that they announced this back in it's 2015, right? It was E3. Yeah, I saw it, and I remember like my heart beating very fast as I started to put the pieces together that the remake is happening, and I was like, holy shit, it's finally happening. And then Shenmue was talked about later that day, and I was like, what the fuck's a Shenmue? And I still don't know what that is, by the way, and that's another spoiler cast, I guess. But yeah, when this was announced, I was very excited, and then they dropped that first trailer that winter at PlayStation Experience, and I was like, all right, action RPG, all right, it looks fine, what is what it is. And then all the development hell happened, and then I constantly predicted wrong that it was going to come that holiday with Death Stranding, and then it never came. And then development hell with video games usually doesn't mix well, and I got worried. But then E3 happened last year, and oh my god, my jaw hit the floor with the way that was presented. I couldn't think of another way to start that conference, to be completely honest. And I'm glad they didn't do the latter of the Avengers first, because I would have had zero expectations going into that trailer. So, and then it all culminates to the demo, where I was like, I played. That's how I was introduced to it. The demo. I'm going to play it again, and then I realized it was a square hitting game. I was like, all right, at least I know what this is now. I'm still going to buy it. I can't hype a game up for 5 years and then not buy it. So I bought it, and then little would I know that it's one of my favorite games I think I'll play this year, knowing what else is coming, or if it comes on time at this point in time. And yeah, it's just really good. The combat, it's just so good. It's not the square mashing game that I thought it was. It's this whole beautiful battle system, with everything's happening at one time, but it's not, because you can slow it down and switch between your characters and all that stuff. And then I really like what they did with the story. I am not that guy that's like the neckbeard saying, I can't believe they did that at the end with the Whispers of Fate, and then what would end up happening at the last chapter 18, Destiny's Crossroads. But yeah, no, I this is like a plus game for me. I loved it. Couple gripes. Well, we'll get into that here in a second. So I mentioned the ending here. This chapter 18, maybe not specifically chapter 18, but there are very specific events that start happening. Chapters 15, pretty much right at the raid of Shinra / like when you meet Hojo for the first time, Professor Hojo, that is. So. Couple differences in the story. I'm going to start with one. And we saw one early, and we kind of see how it all came together at the very end at Chapter 18. The Whispers of Fate. They were not around in the original game. What do you think of them having such a significance, and then the payoff at the end of what it turned out to be? At a very meta level almost.
Yeah, that was one thing. So I have gone back and played 7 through Midgar. I got to the point where I was at the Chocobo Ranch, I think I don't know if that's the right name of it or not, but I made it outside and I was there. So right away, seeing them fly around, I was like, okay, this is new. This is something weird. This is different. And yeah, I mean, in the story, the way they're delivered, they are meant to, you might have to fill in the gap if I fuck this up, but they're meant to keep the timeline on track. Like, they very much reminded me of the Speed Force. So Barry Allen, there's these things called time wraiths, and if Barry runs into the Speed Force to a point where he's like changing time, he goes to a different timeline and does something, or if he goes back to the past and tries to change something, the time wraiths will come after him and try and fucking kill him because he's fucking with the timeline. And they very much, it felt, and they almost kind of visually looked similar to what a time wraith does. So I thought that was a cool thing. And then, they end up kind of being the proverbial neckbeard you spoke of, right? Like, they are kind of, in a way, that thing that's trying to keep the story the way it was when it really doesn't need to be, right? And I think the cool thing about this from a development standpoint is that all of the people who worked on, not all of, but a lot of the people who worked on this game were the people who made the original game. And they're kind of getting to go back and tell their story a different way, a way that they might have. I mean, the way they're telling it today, it's not about like what they might have done, because they made that story once. And if you want to play it and you want to see how it originally was, you can go do that. But I think it's interesting to approach work like that so differently some years later, and have a different take on what the story might be or the outcome of it. What are they called? Whisper of Fate. Sorry, I was going to call them time wraiths. Because I literally, in my head, that was what I kept thinking the whole time I'm playing. Here, I think they kind of fuck with you a little bit, because they show up at times and they make them very antagonistic. Like, it's a problem you need to deal with, but there's no real way to deal with it. And they kind of build it up like it's going to be some great big foe, or like it comes from Sephiroth or something. Like, I didn't know what was driving this, or is it within Aerith, or like, you know what I mean? Like, what is it? But yeah, ultimately I think it paid off in the end. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely thought there was going to be something more related to Aerith than what it turned out to be. I guess it is still related, but the first time you see them is when Cloud meets Aerith in the streets right after the first Mako reactor explosion. And it's weird when you think back on it, because once again, it's one of those things where, like, you've seen the movie, you saw the big twist, and now you go back and all the telling signs are there. Like, Aerith is trying to go with Cloud and like have him stay with her or whatever, and as soon as like that part of the conversation comes up, that's when they start appearing and fucking around and everything like that, and they end up driving Aerith like away into that alley. I've seen.
It also seems like she's just kind of willing to go with fate. Like,
yeah,
I feel like she knows she's gonna die, like we all know she's gonna die, but I feel like she knows too, in a way. And I feel like she hints at that sometimes, like very much through spoken word, but even just the way she reacts to certain situations. And maybe that's like kind of, I'm inferring because I know that she will, but like it feels like they're at least playing with those ideas in her delivery of things.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of those time traveling things later. I have another question kind of more related to that, but it's I've seen it both ways. I think it's more like a big meta thing from the creator saying like, hey, this is what was supposed to happen and this is how it was supposed to happen, but nah. I mean, and we get that nah after defeating the Harbinger of Fate, the big boss at the end, or I guess the mid of Chapter 18. We ultimately then face off against Sephiroth. We'll come back to that in a second. But I kind of like this idea that there's like this big meta thing that's kind of driving the story for what we know it is. And then now that we've kind of conquered that, it opens the game to be this thing. And in an interview in the Ultimania book from Final Fantasy VII Remake that came out after this, that had a big interview with the big three guys in this. I can't remember their names off the top of my head. I'm sorry. But they said that this is a part of that grand scheme of Final Fantasy after the fact and in it. So like that big project that they have with Advent Children, Crisis Core, all that, like they consider this to be part of that universe. And now after this game, I see why that is the direction they're going. So this might not necessarily end up being a full-on remake. It's probably just going to be one hell of a compliment to the original game. Speaking
real quick, is that Tetsuya Nomura?
Yes.
Yoshinori Kitase and Kazushige Nojima?
That's it. Yep, you got it.
And then there's also event planner Motomu Toriyama, he worked in the original game, returned here as co-director and scenario design, and they brought back Nobuo Uematsu.
Yeah, I still kind of want to get that book if it's in English, because I want to dig through all this goodness. I think the one part where I said what the fuck and then immediately follow that up with what the fuck after a boss fight was the Barrett situation. So
at the end,
yes, I believe at this point we are in chapter 16 or 17, and you are kind of cornered. You've Sephiroth, you've countered Sephiroth at this point. You see the leakage of a Genova-esque creature through the halls. You follow it, and it takes you to the president's office. In the original game, you get there, and he is already dead with a sword in the back. In this one, it plays out a little bit differently. You find him hanging off the edge. Barrett saves him, and then he pulls a gun on Barrett, and then all of a sudden Sephiroth shows up, kills the president, then kills Barrett, and then leaves a Genova boss fight for us, which I'll come back to in a second as well here. After that is resolved, Barrett is then resurrected by a Whisper of Fate, kind of showing it might not always be an antagonist. Thoughts?
Yeah, it sucks because you kind of like I think by the time that we got to Barrett getting stabbed, we had already seen a flash of Zack. So I knew that they were doing weird shit with the story. I mean, generally, they're doing weird shit with the story. But by the time that happened, it's not that I was expecting them not to break any of the major beats, but I was like, all right, well, they're not going to kill Barrett, so he's not something or whatever. Like, this is the point where maybe at that point I was like, okay, maybe he's dead. We go into this fight, all the shit goes whatever, and then some weird intervention happens that turns back time. Because while I know certain things of the original 7, I don't know everything of the original 7. So to me, there still might be some weird ass fucking cosmic intervention or divine intervention that comes in and just actually does turn back time in the original, whatever. I have no idea. I still don't. But so part of me was like, okay, well, he's not dead, so whatever. But I love the way that they, show that they show the Whisper of Fate leave his body to indicate that, like, no. The things that are meant to keep things the way they were are keeping things the way they were. And it just doubled down on that, again, being kind of like the silent voice of the longtime fan of Final Fantasy VII playing the game. I think they still acted as that in a way. Yeah. What about, did you think they killed him?
I don't know if I knew they couldn't. You see, that's the thing. The part I talked about earlier with him and his brother, that's a huge pivotal moment because him and his brother get into... They're growing up and a major event that happens in their life, and how Barrett becomes so mad at Shinra and thus kind of forms Avalanche. And you haven't seen that yet. They never haven't really hinted at it either. So, I mean, just kind of looking ahead, that's a part that kind of needs to happen, in my opinion.
Because you want to know where Avalanche came from. Yeah,
and that's such a big part of Barrett's character and the why he is so angry all the time, and why he hates Shinra so much, and why he kept wanting to kill the president when the main objective was to save Aerith. Like, everything clicks in that moment when you find out that the pivotal things that I'll leave it at that for now. The pivotal things that happen with him and his brother, but
I will say they did build up like there were a lot of things he kept saying to Marlene before that final fight where it was kind of like you kind of knew he was going to get stabbed or something was going to happen to him.
Yeah.
But again, like with the weird time travel shit, part of me was like, got it. They did all that so they could make you feel the heartstrings a little bit more.
Yeah, so I like he died and I went to that boss fight. And I was like, all right, well, maybe this is just a really, really, really good excuse to get Barrett out of a boss fight, so that way you don't have to pick your party. But no, I then the Whisper of Fate woke him up, and then I started, like, I didn't quite get it yet, but it was starting to click what was going on. And then that's when Aerith had her big spiel at the end before you walk into the crossroads, and then you start to see everything that's happening there. And then finally it kind of clicked in that boss fight. I forget exactly where. Maybe it was one of the flashbacks or at some line that Aerith said, but it finally made sense there for me. But yeah, I think the whole Whisper of Fate thing was kind of briefly wrap up with this. Like, I think it paid off, and then because of what the shit they pulled with that and how it ended, it makes me like equally excited for part 2 now than when how I was back in 2015 when I saw that trailer for the first time.
Yeah, well, we'll get there, but especially knowing the ending of this too and how it differs from where things left off post Midgar in the original game, that's the part for me where I was just like, okay, cool, you guys are going to do some weird shit. I'm curious. And also, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, but the combat in this game, the way that you have to like approach each fight like a puzzle is so satisfying to just perform each step of the way, to freeze time, to analyze things, to see what's my best strategy, to get your ass kicked and then get right back up and know, okay, well, I died because I didn't have this equipped, or I should have swapped this, or shit like that. So you were, even in moments of failure, you felt like it was, you knew why you failed. Like, I never felt like I got cheated or whatever, where sometimes in an RPG like that, you just get this fucking one hit and you're like, fuck, I don't know.
And the original game has many of that, especially the ultimate weapons, and I forget the name of the other one. I've never even encountered them, but I've seen those 15-minute fights like pan out. Like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But while we're on the subject of boss fights and the battle system, there is another big part of this besides the Whisper of Fates that has changed greatly, and is the fact that we heard the One-Winged Angel score so early in a One-Winged Angel-esque fight at the end of Remake 1 instead of it being at the end of Disc 3.
Yeah.
On the original one, I am pointing, like you can, like the viewer can see me point to the original copy I have on my shelf. Yeah. So, thoughts on kind of being introduced to Sephiroth so early, and to put into perspective, I think of what you've played. You've talked about Sephiroth, and I think you've even encountered him in dialogue, but you haven't had to like really fight him. And his fights aren't necessarily like fights with him; they're fights against Genova, and you don't hit a Genova boss fight until probably like 2/3 of the way, halfway through the first disc, on a cargo ship. So.
Yeah,
we saw that stuff very early. What do you think? One thoughts, and then what do you think that could mean later down the road?
I think that they had to kind of get him in there because of he is such an integral part to that story, and I think if they had waited then the question walking out of this would have been, where's Sephiroth? The fact that he's in it makes you wonder how they're going to change things later.
And
but
he's
that
in
doesn't...
it early.
Chapter
he shows
2
up early. You see, Cloud starts getting all that shit done with him, which happens in the original game, but like that is real early for this.
Yeah, it shows up, I mean, basically as quickly as Cloud meets Aerith. So as long as we've known Aerith, we've known Sephiroth in this case, which started to kind of paint certain pictures for me. Once we learned a little bit about Aerith's background, then it started making me wonder about Cloud's background, because I don't know all that stuff either. So I'm excited to learn that as, you know, they want to tell it in this new story. I think fighting him in this, I still don't think that we fought the fight, right? Like, I think there's still going to be many more.
Yeah.
But I feel... I don't know. Like,
I think for me,
yeah.
it kind of like put the exclamation point on the whole what the fuck. Like, I can't believe this is all happening in part 1, and I just defeated the Harbinger and Fate, and anything's possible now. And he's talking about reunion, and that's early for him to start talking about reunion. You may not even know what that is, but like all this shit is like. I mean, Hojo started talking about reunion too, so not just Sephiroth, but like all this shit is hitting the fan, and then all of a sudden the famous. I mean, we were talking about on the podcast like how it's so weird to hear like these old scores I'm so used to, but in a slightly mixed way, but it's still really good. And then for me to hear One Winged Angel at the very end of this game is like, holy shit! Like they did it, they're doing it.
Yeah,
I think for me it was just a big exclamation point, and I really do like the introduction to Sephiroth really early. They don't really tell you who he is. I know who he is because I played the first game. At least I played the first game, the intro part, many times. You somewhat know who he is. But like for someone brand new coming to this series, I think they still got the same experience of like, who is this? Because he's mentioned early, but you don't really know what's going on with him until you get to Shinra headquarters in the original game. And the same kind of thing happened here. You don't really know who he is until you get to Shinra headquarters. It's just a man that kind of keeps popping up weirdly.
Does Tifa or someone at some point say like something about Cloud fighting with him, or that someone says that Sephiroth was a world-class soldier, or something, like he was a famous soldier. Somebody says that at some point early on.
That is known. That's like that was like newspaper news. Like he is well known in regard to that.
But then there's this whole weird, like, I think the way that they showed him only to Cloud made it seem like there's something weird, mysterious going on. There's something about him. There's the part where they talked about Cloud's eyes and how he must have been a soldier because you can see the Mako in his eyes. But then I also noticed something similar in Aerith's. Like, she has a similar brightness to her eyes. And I'm kind of saying this without asking you to say, I don't want you to spoil Super or anything. And I might be totally out of line, but I feel like you can kind of draw a parallel between the two. Like, once you learn in this game how they deliver Aerith's background and how she came to be, then you start to think about how Cloud might have come to be. And then once you get into Shinra, you're like in the where Genova is, where you're doing all of the post Red 13 stuff when you're running through there. And yeah, Hojo starts talking about, oh, okay, well, thankfully you're here because you and Aerith can do stuff and then make more. Like, it was that kind of thing. And
make the child lead us to the promised land pretty much.
Yeah, so, but then I start wondering, okay, like, what was Sephiroth created, like, as a super soldier? Like, is that what we're kind of getting towards?
You're getting into the right territory. I'm not going to confirm either right or wrong with that, but some stuff you're saying is completely wrong, and then other stuff you're kind of getting the gist of where the game ends up going. Cool. I'll just leave it at that. We might have to visit some of that stuff later down the road here for some of the questions.
That's fine.
But enough of the ending stuff right now. We'll get back into it. I have some stuff looking ahead in the next parts because of this unique situation we're in. But some spoiler allowed territory here for the questions we kind of probably couldn't answer quite well on the podcast on air. What was your favorite boss fight?
I like the VR missions a lot.
Okay, the
Like
summon battles.
I know that's it's not like straight ass in the boss. It wasn't necessarily a boss fight, but I really liked fighting Shiva.
Yeah,
That was fun.
I would say anything Coliseum VR mission related, just to show is like just a giant showcase for what the battle system is and what it can do, and how to properly prepare for a big fight like that when it allows you to.
I think they let you stretch your muscle memory a good bit and let you show that you understand the combat system. I think too, in those, because they could kind of close off the area and make it that simulation, the game just looked incredible. Because we talked on the podcast a little bit about how there are certain times where like, you go to for Stan Lee's, right? You go to open a fucking door and it's like really pixelated, like the doorknob, and it just stuff like that where it was like this game wasn't fully, or like top to bottom. It's not everything around the edges is just pristine, and I don't know why. I'd love to hear why that is. Like, is it a time thing? Is it we're running on 7-year-old hardware thing?
I think you're exclusive on 7-year hardware. I think that's what it is.
But going into this Coliseum, going into this VR missions, like everything looked great, which was, I think that was part of, not that added to the boss fight itself, but those boss fights really let you get excited about stuff. But I did too like not the final fight with Sephiroth, but that the octopus boy underground. With all the tentacles coming up. In Shinra. You get kind of right after Barrett gets stabbed.
Oh, Genova.
Yeah. Thank you. Once you're doing that, because by that point in the game, and I think that's the strength of the combat system, not so much the boss fight itself, but it's the fact that by that point, I had designated Aerith as my healer and Tifa as just let's go fuck shit up super close, and then Cloud I kind of had as my like mid range, like. I would move him in to do some quick hits and build up his ATB, but then I would cast spells that would counter things. And
so I've talked briefly before on air about how sometimes like there was one summer where I was playing through Final Fantasy VII myself, and then I had like a save for when my cousins came up to my grandmother's, and I would go down there and I would just kind of play through the events I had already played through. Well, the first Genova boss fight is the area where I got stuck on my save and I realized I was underleveled, and that was the period that I decided that the Cousins game was going to become the main game, and I would just grind out levels when they came came up. So, or when I was by myself and I would play the actual game with them when they would come up. So the fact that I was able, like, Genova, I don't know how hard her boss battles are later in the game, but I remember that first one just fucking wrecked me time and time again to frustration, and I just, the peak of Matt raging is in that Genova boss fight somewhere and in a deep past. Thankfully, I don't get that mad anymore. But no, when I realized that it is a Genova boss fight that is happening right here, like everything was just like, oh shit, like all the childhood memories, all that stuff. And this battle was hard. Red. It was hard. I thankfully did not die, but it was a very hard battle. And I just the entire time it was nostalgia. Everything came flooding back, and I can't believe I was battling Genova in the first part, because Genova's usually not around not at least in the first game, or the original. Sorry, does not come around until after Midgar. So.
Is that your favorite boss fight, or did you have a different one that was?
It's not my favorite. I just had to tell that story. My favorite one is the Hell House, and I was playing that section of the sewer with Aerith, where you're trying to make your way back to Sector 7, I think, or Sector 5, and it was there that the Hell House is a normal enemy in the original game, and it's a tough one. I remember using it to buff up Cloud and Aerith time and time again, and then just keep using Healing Wind to heal myself. So I got to that area, and this game is kind of grounded for the most part. I mean, there's some bizarre stuff, but it's like for the enemies in that area, they're kind of grounded. So I was curious about how the hell they would make a house an enemy. And then we got to the Coliseum, and I kind of forgot about it. But then the Shinra, Don Corneo started talking up this thing. I was like, is it the Hell House or not? And then that thing emerged from the ground. I started like freaking out, like, hell yeah, the Hell House! I can't believe they actually did it. And the design of it is really good. Like the physical attacks, like you have to really think. You have to be mindful of the color of the houses, of course, for your magic attacks, because that's pretty much how you deal damage. And then I wanted to go back to that chapter in hard mode once I buff up enough levels, because I heard there's one of those like Tonberries, the instant stabber boys that's floating around in that boss battle in hard mode. So I'm really that's the one thing I kind of want to build myself to when I get back to this in hard mode. But yeah, I think the Hell House kind of takes the cake as my favorite boss fight.
I don't think we need another like that Tonberry was a motherfucker.
That was really good too. That's like a what do you call it when it doesn't make your list? Like a special shout out.
Yeah. Was he in the original game? Because that was something
I think he's just a regular enemy.
Okay,
not in that area, but I think like once you get out to the world, I think he pops up, because he's in every Final Fantasy. I think at some point
he's in
10.
Lot.
I know he's in 10.
He's in 10. I know I've seen the character before, but it was just The Hell House was one. I think that you're right. That was just a fun surprise that I remembered it from the original game, but this one, it's just like, not that this is like super grounded in reality, but it's still just like, it's not as goofy as the original was. So how are they going to do it? And I think they did a really cool job with it. And that was a fun fight too.
Yeah, it was really good. Let's stick with the favorites here. Favorite character, and it doesn't have to necessarily be story related. It could just be the one you like to use fighting if you like them all equally throughout the game.
I mean, Tifa is like, that's, as you're asking it, that's the gut reaction, but
I'll split the answers here and might let you think a little bit. But I think my favorite story character is Cloud, because there are at points in the side missions, and this is the differentiator. I love them all, but the differentiator is when you like find a kid or a kitten in a bullshit side mission, he's like, this is a waste of time. Like he gets what I'm saying, he gets what I'm thinking. So I think just for that small reason alone, I think he edges out the rest. He is mopey, he is kind of like silent at times, but that is Cloud, and I think they like kind of even took it to another level with this, because they had the ability to kind of stretch out the detail, elongate it almost. So yeah, and he starts to come around just like he does in the game by the end of this. So yeah, I think he's my favorite. But my favorite person to fight as was Aerith, because I would just stay back and fucking twirl my wand or whatever, my staff, and then hit that Tempest move, and then all of a sudden I was praying and healing my party as they kept attacking, and then I would just use their ATB bars and just do their specials and shit. Yeah, I would just hang back with her and just deal magic all day.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of that. Again, like this is later, like after you kind of learn the system a little bit, I would definitely drop back with her and do that. And with Tifa, I was always using the refocus limit break, and then I had a necklace that I think it was a necklace that she would wear that would automatically refill the ATB meters after using refocus. So it was a good balance of that. I think you're right about Cloud. Like in the original, you probably would get like the 3 dots from him or something like that, little ellipses, or whatever. But this, I mean, you can actually like, see it on his face. You can see him like where the exhaustion or where the like frustration with whatever was happening. I think ultimately though, I think like just fighting as Tifa, like she was so quick. Not that Cloud wasn't quick, but just some of those punches, the somersaults, the shit like that was really good. But I think we talked about it a while back. Cloud, I think across the board, aside from Sephiroth, they did a really good job in this game of making every character feel human, like superhuman, like not superhuman. Just they did a great job of making them feel like they were real people in a way. And I don't know, something about Tifa felt the most genuine in a way. Maybe because she's the only one not fucking created out of a clone. And Barrett's a fucking caricature that I don't understand.
He becomes more human. I promise you, there is a story reason why he's so angry. Yeah. But yeah, I think he mimics the original character quite well too, because that Barrett was also just very angry all the time and did not trust Cloud. to an extent or whatever. So, like, I think they were all just recreated very well. Like, I had no complaints with it at all.
No, I agree. They were all really well done. Even like the villains and stuff that pop up, they're dumbass anime characters, but they all still worked in a way.
Reno and Rude.
Yeah, like exactly. They might look like fucking Lion King villains or something. They were very Kingdom Hearts to me. I don't know how they were in the original game. Were they in the original game?
Yeah, they are.
But they were in this. They were just like so weird ass.
Yeah,
over the top.
All those people were in that. I think Sang comes a little bit earlier than in the original, but they're all Reno, Rude. They're all in it. So I think they did all those characters justice too, because Reno was very over the top and Rude was just like straight to the point, from what I remember. So I think everyone just got good justice here. We could maybe combine, or if you need the split, I will accept that answer as well. But it's favorite setting or chapter?
Shit.
I think I'll start if you want to.
If you have an answer, yeah, because I don't know.
I think my favorite chapter story wise, and this is going to be a little bit of an outlier answer because I could kind of cheat and just say the end, like one of the Shinra missions or whatever. But I really liked the Ghost Yard, the Ghost Train Yard or whatever it was called. That was a area that it was called that in the original. They didn't really expand upon why, and it was like 3 screens long. You still had to move the train carts along.
Yeah, I remember that.
And there were some tough enemies that they replicated here besides the ghouls. I don't remember the ghouls. But I just like that they built some lore around it. It was kind of sort of a little bit creepy, and I did like those boss fights in it as well. They were I think the ghoul at the in like that control room was a good tough design, and the way he would kind of sporadically change the environment you were in.
Because that was one of the first examples where you could not rely on physical attacks.
Yeah.
Up until that point, you could kind of just beef your way through it if you really wanted to. But that was the first example of like, nah, dude, you gotta...
Yeah, there's 2 different forms, and you kind of had to adjust accordingly. And then I did like the way that chapter ended. I did like that boss fight with I forget the dude's name, but he was on that chariot. He's kind of badass. But despite that one phase where you couldn't really hit him besides Aerith, that kind of blew. But Eligor, sorry, not Eligor. Is it Eligor? Yeah, it's Eligor. Yeah, I just like that. I just like both those boss fights. I like the kind of the lore. I like how there's a little ghost story. And then, of course, the Whispers of Fate popped up, and I think it was to prevent Aerith, Tifa, and Cloud from getting to Sector 7 too early, to make sure they couldn't stop what was supposed to happen. So I'm going to go with that. It's kind of like my favorite kind of setting chapter.
Yeah, I think that one was really good. I think it was chapter 11.
That sounds right.
Something like that. I think a little bit earlier than that, like one of the moments that stands out most to me was
chapter 11. Yes.
I think it was chapter 4, the Jesse chapter, where you get to do the motorcycle game for the first time. But that whole sneaking in kind of thing, and like that was the first time that you got to, because you kind of got a little bit of Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge early on, but I think that having that moment, like where she's just talking to Cloud and working with Cloud to try and, do her top secret mission, which was to go back to her house and steal her dad's key card. And then the fact that Biggs and Wedge come along, for the ride and the adventure, like you get to know them a little bit more. I think that was just a really solid character building chapter, so that later on, when they all get fucking pinned down, it hurt a little bit more. I think like there was that moment where the stairs you're running up, I forget what that is, but later on in the game, everything's crumbling and you run up and you find Jessie kind of just like completely fucked up, and Cloud kind of like picks her up and is carrying her, and she says, "So you're the guy who gets to hear my last words." Like she still was like flirting right before dying, but it still just had that kind of like, I don't know, like that phrase is something you don't often get to hear in like something like that, like hearing someone say shit like that. You only get those moments so many times in a game, and I felt like after that early chapter versus the back end where you're getting it again, just kind of like still stayed true to her character, but mirrored in a way that, I don't know, it hit pretty hard.
Kind of briefly here, do you think Jesse is still alive? Because, well, we kind of knew Wedge maybe kind of got out, despite that one
but
little
Biggs was
snippet.
basically dead.
But Biggs was in there, like Jesse, when it all collapsed.
And then we see that thing after the fact. So, I mean, maybe.
So, yeah, that's kind of one thing. Now, we know Biggs is around. Wedge, kind of the last time we saw him, he got kind of sucked away by the Whispers of Fate. So, we kind of don't know.
But the way they suggested it made it seem that Wedge was still alive.
Yeah.
My gut reaction when they showed Biggs in bed, after this kind of like, after we knew that the timeline kind of got fucked up, my thought was, okay, got it. We just traded Wedge for Biggs, is the way I saw it.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
In that way.
I honestly don't remember what they do, or if they are even around in the original after that point. They may all die in that area.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see there, at least knowing at least one, if not two, maybe even three of the original Avalanche members are around. I'm going to transition us here. We kind of, unless anything you want to add about the current game, the remake part 1 that you wanted to add in here. I was going to maybe look ahead at what is a unique situation here with the Final Fantasy VII Remake.
I think I might have the thing that bridges the gap between our current situation and future situations, and it's called Chadley.
Oh, yeah.
What the fuck is he up to?
Yeah, he's like very prominent, like, yeah, I'm an intern at Shinra, blah, blah, blah. And then you get to Shinra and he's like, yeah, I'm here to help you out. I don't know what's going on, but I'm here to help. It's like,
I don't know, man.
You think he's just... You think he's just
like
Google acquiring all this data for them to spit it right back at you?
That's what I'm saying. Like, is he doing all this? Like, hey, I'm on your side, but actually, he's like really fucking deep in there. Whose side is he on?
That does remind me of the time of that area of the game where you're running around trying to find like the inside guy from Avalanche, and you're like, "What was the code word?" And you're just saying it randomly to all these guys. They're like, "What?" And they're like, "Oh, never mind." And we're like, "What?"
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you got a big ass sword in your back, a gun in your hand.
Yeah, no one fucking is upset at that. I think though, like Chadley, he fucking like, what am I trying to say? I don't remember. I don't even know. I don't trust him very much.
Okay.
It's kind of where I'm at.
I don't know. It gives you a steep discount on that first materia purchase, so...
Yeah, but why? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the ultimate catch here?
Well, fair enough. We will have to see how his arc turns out, though, in the next parts. Now, I say parts plural. Joe, how many parts do you think this game ends up being?
Well, Matt, like all good Final Fantasies, this will be a trilogy.
Like, all the good ones, okay.
I'm just talking about 13.
I know, there's only one. And the other one, I got a sequel. That's a terrible-ass sequel, so... I don't know.
I think this will break that curse. I think honestly, though, too. Like, as much as I am excited, I do think part 2 is going to be a slog. In a weird way. I don't know why. I just, like, how do you hit this note again? That's the thing I'm kind of concerned about moving forward.
Well, I have an idea maybe where you can end it, but it's going to be a long-ass game, or they're going to have to cut some shit out, I think. Because so I'm just gonna throw it out there. The first disc ends on the Genova boss fight immediately following Aer's death. I think it's called Genova. It's birth, Genova birth maybe, or Genova death. It's something. It's a Genova boss fight. But between the escape from Midgar and where she dies, the city of the ancients, the lost city of the ancients. You have events in Calm. You got to go to the Mithril Mine. You got to go to the harbor. You got to get on the cruise ride of death. And your first encounter with Genova in the original game. That ends up leading you to Mount Coral and then the Gold Saucer, which is a huge staple in Final Fantasy VII. And it's like one of the most exciting things. I'm curious to see what they do. That leads into Cosmo Canyon. The big event there is with Barrett and his brother, and this is where this is the farthest I've ever gone in the game. And then you go back to Nibelheim. You have some events in Rocket Town, in a place called the Keystone, and then you do get to the City of the Ancients. So you got quite a chunk here that's in multiple towns and multiple different environments. That would be one hell of a way to end part 2, but I think it's a long way to get there, or you're gonna cut some stuff.
You think they end it in 2 with her dying? Like that's the big finale?
I don't know a big thing like that to end on for a part 2. I mean, the sky's the limit, though. I mean, you did end with Sephiroth in part 1. I didn't think that was possible. So you can kind of do anything, but if you're kind of following original source material and similar events, that's kind of like your next big event.
There's a couple things, though, right? So they show... So at first I thought it was just Cloud before he went Super Saiyan, but they show Zack, and they show Zack is alive, which, from my understanding, he should not be alive.
That's correct. Due to lore in the original game and the ending to Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core now. The ending of Crisis Core has him dying in a full-off Shinra assault, helping Cloud escape to where events from 7, he picks up. Tifa finds him in the train station, and thus things happen.
So, thinking about the fact that they're showing Zack, like, I don't know if they're going to kind of do more of like callbacks to Crisis Core or stuff like that in this game. And like,
yeah,
that was just to kind of set the time. I
mean, like, kind of going back to the Ultimania book, when he says, like, he wants that whole Final Fantasy VII collective, and this is a part of it, I can see where that's going. I think the Zack... Well, all right, I'm just going to say, as far as parts, I think this ends up being 4 parts.
Oh, wow.
I think this is going to go a while, especially, like, if they're going to give the same level of detail they gave Midgard to some of these other areas, it's going to be quite the hefty install size on a lot of these parts. I could see story beats where they end it. 2, 3, and 4. If they really want to expand upon the Northern Cave, because disc 3 is pretty much just the last section of the game. It's not really anything else. They could really expand upon that section if they want to, or like kind of leave part 4. I don't know. I'm also curious to see like if these are full on disc releases, or if like, hey, like it's all right. Well, part 1 is part 1, but like, you get the part 2, and then there's DLC for different world map events that kind of maybe bridge a part 3 or something like that. I don't know. I think you're gonna get 4 fucking games though. Various lengths.
The DLC stuff is tricky because
exactly. Yeah, I know exactly what you're gonna say, and I just say exactly.
Like leveling and that kind of stuff. Like, it's just, I don't know. I can see them saying, hey, this part's unnecessary to move the story forward, so we're going to cut it. And as a bonus, we'll turn it into a VR mission, or, some fucking weird thing for Chadley to steal your data from. But yeah, DLC sounds weird, but it also sounds weird to me to have even 3 parts. Like, the whole thing is weird. The fact that it's just, the original game, you could probably get through what we just played through in 7-8 hours, maybe?
Yep.
And it took me, I think, 40.
That was around there, 30, 40, somewhere.
Yeah, between like 30 and 40 hours. So when you think of it that way, suddenly this game is super... I mean, granted, it's a couple years apart, so 40 hours every couple years is not that huge of an ask, but it's a big fucking game. And as far as I understand, as of this recording, it's still in the planning phases.
Yeah.
Is what they suggested in some recent interview.
Yeah, I mean, I see something, like, there's a couple things you can probably cut. Like, Calm, I guess you really don't need to... You can do... The big thing that happens there is Cloud's flashback to Nibelheim, where he and Sephiroth invade, and that's where Sephiroth realizes who he is. I'm blurring the part of what Cloud remembers and the actual truth. I don't want to, for spoilers' sake, I know this is a spoiler cast, but for spoilers' sake, I'm going to stay away too much from that. But I guess like that big flashback, that retelling of that story from Cloud's point of view can be told somewhere else. You can kind of cut Calm there. But man, like there is so much. Like, I want to see what they do with the giant ass fucking snake. Did you get there?
No idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, so to get to, I think it's the Mithril Mines, you have to go through, and this is your introduction to chocobos in this game for like riding around the world. There's a big area of fog, and there's this giant snake that you can kind of see going around in this like fog on the world map.
Maybe I did get that.
So, like, if you run into it, just your character, the snake, like, as soon as you step in the fog, the snake can track you, and then it's a boss fight, and you're not prepared for that boss fight at this point in the stage. But what you do, if you get a chocobo and you kind of wait for a somewhat decent time, you can easily outrun the snake and get to the Mithril Mines, to which you enter the Mithril Mines and see another giant snake slayed by one Sephiroth. So, like, I don't know, there's little things like that I'm curious to see how they do. But like, I can see also that stuff being cut. But yeah, like, my gut says that they're going to expand upon other stuff, and I think they're going to kind of milk this for all it is. I hope that the planning stage they're in is planning for 2, 3, and 4 all at the same time.
I think the one thing, like you just said, the big snake is scary, right? You can't take it on. You know you will just get fucked up. And then you find one that was killed by Sephiroth. And from a storytelling point of view, that is showing you how powerful Sephiroth is. But we kind of already know that at this point. So I think you're right. Like, certain things they'll be able to cut. Certain things they'll have to keep. It'll be a curious thing. But what... like, I mean, you just listed a whole bunch of stuff, and I know you have some more experience with the old one than I do. What part of that old game are you most excited to see? Because I always thought it was like the Midgar stuff is obviously the big one, but what of the later game? Because again, I only know the Chocobo Ranch. So what's the part for you that's like, I can't wait for this?
I think the obvious answer is how they deal with Aerith. I think I like, part of me thinks that they have to stay faithful to an extent, but the other part of me says, look at what they just did. And they might throw that out the window or do something a little bit more unexpected. For story reasons, though, unless they, like I said, once again, though, they opened this up with the way they ended part 1 here. In the original game, it was necessary for her to die. There is like no way around it. She is still a part of the game, just not in the same way as just being a party member character, especially at the very end when Meteor is cast. So if they even just stay to the same story beat as Meteor coming, they need to have her die, and it's just a matter of how they do it. So I'm very curious to see how they redo that. And then second answer is the Gold Saucer. The Gold Saucer is a very unique, cool little area with all kinds of mini games. I'm just curious to see like what they bring back. Like, there was like Chocobo racing you could bet on. I think there was like all kinds of little mini games. I can't remember all of them. I'm curious to see like what they bring back and how, and I think that's just a fun little area. And like, if you're only able to stay in it for a chapter, or if they end up doing a world map and you can just kind of regularly revisit it whenever. But I think for sure that's in the next game. I don't think there's a way you leave that out. There's not enough story beats between now and the Gold Saucer, in my opinion.
Is the snowboarding showing up in part 2 or part 3 or part 4?
I actually don't know where the snowboarding is. I want to say I did it, so it's between now and Cosmic Canyon, which is right after the Gold Saucer, but it might be in Mount Coral, honestly. That's probably the part where it's at, which is right before the Gold Saucer. Yeah, you might see it. I mean, you got bike riding this time. I don't know the next time you see bike riding, so I might get
Did you fight Leviathan in this game?
Not yet.
Just side note. Where is that? Because I kept seeing people talk about it, and I was like, oh, shit. But I never found...
There is a series of events you have to do in hard mode, I believe. And
okay, got it.
And then you get it as a VR mission. Or no, or is in the Coliseum. Or is a VR mission.
Okay, all right.
I know, but I kept seeing the help thing, and I thought I was like spoiling it because... Or for a second, I thought the game was spoiled because they kept talking about Bahamut.
Yeah.
And then Bahamut shows up at the end as like the form of the Harbinger and Fate. I was like, oh shit, well, Leviathan is next. And then it never happened, so I was curious, but I ended up looking it up.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a VR mission, but there's things you have to do to get to it, and then Leviathan is a requirement to face a very super boss. They have one of these in this game. It's like Ball and Chain or something like that. Yes, and it's in the Shinra VR Coliseum. I think just one thing. I know you said you don't know. How much do you know about Zack?
From what I heard from you, and then like reading half of the Wikipedia page, he was a soldier with Cloud, and he's Aerith's ex.
All right. Well, yeah. Okay. You're on the right track there for what you probably should know regarding what you played. All right. Well, I'll ask you this way: the basis of the story has a lot, like a lot of the story has a lot to do around this late game find of Zack. Zack is hinted at time and time again, especially Aerith early on. But he does end up having a huge part despite not really being in the game. Do you think he is alive, or do you think it was just something to tease, like, oh shit, they can really do whatever?
I mean, at the end of the day, that could have been Aerith. That could have been them showing us that Aerith can see more than she's letting on, and she just sees time as it happens. And she could have been seeing that moment in time as they walked through.
Are there different timelines? Are we talking about time traveling here? Timelines? A multiverse?
I think that gets messy really easily.
I think so as well.
As proven by the aforementioned Flash. So I think it's a tough thing to pull off. They could pull it off. They could totally go that route. I don't know that they do. For me, and this is probably unique to me, but my final bit with Sephiroth, everyone died except for Aerith, and I had to take out Sephiroth with a almost dead Aerith as well. So in that regard, it made it kind of poetic that she was the final standing character, but also it was interesting that that moment happened where it kind of showed me more of who Aerith might be in that way. Like I could read into it that way and not look at it as, hey, this is a definite, but this is a possibility, or something like that. And I think it also just signified on another level of like how all of these stories of all of these people have all come together, and everyone's connected in some way or another. And honestly, they're connected through Cloud. Like Cloud's the common ground here. But I think it was, I don't know, it was significant in that way, because they could honestly, like, tomorrow you could read a press release that Square says, hey, you know what, despite all this fucking money we just made, we decided we're going to go sell insurance now and make pachinko machines. Worked out for some other Japanese developers, sort of. And if that were the case and we never got a part 2 to this game still stands on its own.
Yeah.
And I think that ending still fits as a standalone ending. It's not where people want it to go and whatever, but it does kind of work. Except for the big fat to be continued in the fucking skyline.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think that there are parts of it that still can work.
Yeah, I really don't want there to be time travel, because like you said, it gets messy. And then we just saw it with the Avengers movie. All the fucking neckbeards come out and say, well, they broke the rules here, here, and here, and I don't want to deal with all that. I know I can stay away from it, but I'd rather, like, I don't know, just rather not that be a thing at all. But yeah, that does get messy when you do that. I still think Zack is dead. I just think it doesn't happen there, and they just left it open like that. Maybe one, because they don't know what they want to do with it, but also just like as another way of saying, like, we're gonna do whatever the fuck we want this time around, and you know, you can deal with it or not. So I think it's gonna be something along that, and I have watched numerous. I've been building it all up because it took me longer than I expected to beat this game. But then I finally, when I beat it, I just like went loose on like the different YouTube theories and stuff, what they're going to do. And I've seen some bizarre ass theories that, you know, when in the right, when you're picking the right evidence out, it makes sense. But like, I don't know. I think everything is just very meta because they know the fan base and they're just kind of like poking the bear a little bit just to do it.
That's an easy one to.
So yeah, unless you magically have acquired all the knowledge of the source material, is there anything else you want to add to what you think may come?
I don't know what else, and I think that's the exciting part. The weird thing for me walking away from this is, yes, I'm excited for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, but I'm also excited for Final Fantasy 16, and I'm excited to see if Square does this in another way, and I'm excited to see what other companies start saying, well, hold on a second, we have all this shit from the PS1 era that's been untouched for 20 years. Because this is not the first time that Final Fantasy VII Remake has come up, and I don't just mean the 2015 thing, but the beginning of the PS3 when they had that weird tech demo. Prior to that on PS2, I've been reading a fuck ton of old video game magazines, and there's a thing in one of those that was talking about a PS2 remake of Final Fantasy VII. It's just like all the way back since basically a year after the fucking game came out, they've been wanting to remake it in some way. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of franchises out there, and there's a lot of stuff from that era that have sat dormant as well. And I'm curious to see how the success of this, and honestly, you see it with Resident Evil 2 remake. Obviously, that influenced them to jump right onto 3. Now there's rumors of Resident Evil 4. Mm-hmm. But there was the scuttlebutt about Dino Crisis being remade, or the hope, at least, of it. And I think there's stuff like that that I'm excited to see in the wake of this as well. Is how does this influence other legacy content?
Before we get too big picture here, I do have one last question about specifically Final Fantasy VII. What is an improvement / area / change, something that they need to change drastically going into the next game?
I think that the things for me that I felt by the end of it, I was finally feeling comfortable with what I had to do and materia usage. I think finding a gameplay way to teach you the use of materia and the swapping of materia earlier would be helpful. I think by this point, if they just kept the exact same system, I could roll right into the next part and feel okay with it. Granted, some years in between might make that difficult, but I think that generally I'm fine with. I think the big thing that I'd want to see is like expanding the party, as weird as that sounds, but I don't know, just giving me, it's funny because I thought about that a lot in this, like, did they need to? And ultimately, like, I'm saying this now and I don't think they need to, because juggling 3 people was a perfect amount for the amount of like real-time action you had to do versus stopping and slowing down time. But I think having the option could be interesting. I think building out your party in different ways might be something, but even that, like, I don't know. I could make an argument for or against my own argument.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in the game, in the original game, you are, well, I mean, yeah, the world map, you finally get the option to select your party for the world, like when you do the random encounters. But there are instances in the original game where, like, you are specifically picking the party members to go where, and you don't do that in this one. They kind of split it for that one section in Hojo's lab for you specifically.
Yeah, they kind of force you into using.
Yeah, there's a spot where like elevators are involved in the original game with splitting the party in a specific way. So I think you're gonna see that system come in. I think 4 people is gonna be too many. I think traditional like Final Fantasy rules like make it that 3 is gonna be the thing, but like, if we do the party selection thing, and you know they can't write the story in a way where you know it's 3 party members at a time. They actually did it quite cleverly, in my opinion, in this game, and is decide not to make Red 13 a thing or like playable. It'd be interesting, like, how do levels affect them? Like, if they're not battling, do they get levels? In the original game, they did not, so you had to like constantly grind out your parties in and out, and then when they were split, you were kind of screwed if you didn't, you know, smartly do it. So I would be curious to see how they do that. I think my big thing is they can't do the side quest system that they did in this. That was my biggest gripe. And if they do go world map, which I don't think they will, but if they do go world map, they definitely need to overhaul that entire system.
Because I don't want the world map from 15 to make its way back in.
See, I'm not familiar with the world map from 15, but you told me about it, and it sounds terrible.
It just, it was too, it's boring. A lot of empty space. So I think that closing in a lot of that stuff for this, I think you're right. I think side quests, I completely forgot about how, like, disruptive they were to the flow of the story. In hindsight, I remember feeling post each side quest chapter, like going into them and realizing what I was walking into. I was like, all right, I'm done for the night. But after having just wrapped up a side quest chapter, I really appreciated what I got out of it. I think the one with the first Whack-A-Box side quest chapter, I think it was a 9. Like, doing that chapter, walking into it, I was like, God, fuck you guys. And by the end of it, I'm like, okay, I learned, like, a better way to use Cloud for physical combat with the Whack-A-Box challenge. I forget all the other side quests of that chapter now. But there were other things in that they did a good job of. And I think, back to my earlier point of not knowing how the materia really fully worked until the end, I think if they could introduce that, if they are going to do side quests, make the side quests meaningful in that way. Because really, we got to see Cloud grow and change a little bit through his interactions with some of the side quest characters, but not... I didn't change, right? Like, Cloud changed and I get to experience things through Cloud a little bit more, but I didn't change and I didn't learn a lot about playing the game, which I think that part might be missing a little bit.
Do you see them making an area where you can just grind levels, or do you think they'll stay consistent with, like, all right, well, you kind of exhausted all these battles unless you really, really wanted to grind. Like, it wasn't easy to grind. They kind of made it a thing to do, and I never did it, but, like, I guess you could definitely keep running those areas and do it. Do you think they'll go more traditional Final Fantasy that way in a later part? Or, like, I'll even ask this question. I'll just kind of pile this on. Do you think your save game is going to be a thing in part 2?
I don't think they need to give you the option to grind. I think that the days of grinding in something like this are gone and better suited for Final Fantasy XIV, if that's your bag, right? Mm-hmm. I think that there was something nice about this game where dying didn't mean restarting. Dying
and he gave you a list of checkpoints to come back from, too.
Well, and if you just picked up right from where you left off, it kept all the experience you had just earned before dying. So you were never, set back the same way. But I think also you were, I lost my train of thought. I think you have, nope, totally gone. Shit. I'm looking at this picture of Jack Trenton over here, and it's just
for inspiration.
Yeah, mesmerizing. No, so the experience points, right? Like, you could die in a battle and get set right back to the beginning of that battle and retain all of your experience points. I think the thing that may have been helpful, again, materia, because by the end of it, I didn't have the materia where I needed it to be necessarily. So I think that if there are ways to grind, I'd hope it's more for that versus just traditional leveling just to get a couple more hit points.
Yeah, I'd rather not grind, but I just know, like, you kind of think of that, like, RPG mentality, and it's still kind of stuck with me.
But they ditched so much of that in this game that I would find it surprising for them to go back to it.
Yeah, me too. The save, do you think anything comes with your save, or if they import it, or...
That's a weird one. Like, I want to say yes, and I bet that's probably a question they're going to ask themselves a lot in the development of this. It's hard because by the time the next game comes out, we will be knee deep in the next generation. Mm-hmm. So your save is going to be reliant on cloud movement, and that's going to be reliant on how PlayStation's going to handle that stuff. In a year from now, when the game comes out on Xbox and PC, that is going to be a different story, but even then, that's a little bit messier. I feel like they kind of can't pull your save forward.
Do you then just start level 1? Level 1, but, like, with a buff, or they just balance it? Or do you just start, like, a blanket, like, level, like, probably by the time you're done a normal, you're at, like, level 37, 38. Yeah. You just make a blanket, like, you're at level 40, and you just kind of keep crawling up.
Yeah. That's a problem I don't want to have to solve.
Yeah.
Like, there's different solutions for that. Like, I know how I might solve it, but, like, I don't know.
Just general question. Like, once again, we don't get paid to make these decisions, so I'm just
I
I'm just gonna pick on your brain
know.
here.
Like,
Yeah,
maybe...
I don't know how you do it either. I think you're just gonna get a level 1, but just like with buffed ass or scaled ass.
Everything
enemies.
is scaled. Yeah. I think they could but here's the thing: when they get to the point where all 3-4 of these games are in one package, then how do you scale that? So I think what they could do is kind of look at it and say, okay, most players reached level 37 by the end of this game, so we're going to start the second one at level 50. Most players reached level 90 by the end of that game.
Level 50 is the cap in this game, by the way.
Right, so then that's there you go. You just answered it. So then part 2 starts at 50. And then the cap is 100. And part 3 starts at 100 and the cap is 150 and so on. I think that's the way you do it, so that you feel like there's a consistency across each game.
Well, fair enough. I got nothing else for you. I am out for sure this time, unless you got something you want to add once again.
No, I wanted to bring up Chadley because I don't know what the fuck that is. Do you want to play Final Fantasy 14?
No.
All right.
I don't want to play 15 either.
Just checking.
And I'm not even that curious about a 16.
I really am, honestly. Because I want to see what a modern story, what a brand new story looks like with the lessons that they learned from this. Knowing how 15 13 struggled so long to find what it wanted to do, and then I feel like 15 was just this lost remnant of time that just kind of had to get done, and it got to the point where it did. And then 7 Remake is everything they couldn't do in either of those, you know? And it's not without its flaws, but I still think 7 Remake is so good that I'm hopeful for what a 16 might look like. Of course, all the people who just worked on this game probably are not working actively on a 16, but, you know.
Yeah. Well, what's the Kingdom Hearts 3 team doing?
They might have been working on this in a way.
I was saying, like, yeah, that's maybe the team you split off to do it.
I mean, Nomura was on this, and he was Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, I know they're in the planning stage, but be ready for more predictions every year, saying that Part 2 comes in holiday alongside of Death Stranding 2 by one Norman Pettis. Well, that is all I have for this. I'll go ahead. I'll rein it all in. Thanks for hanging out with us on this new but still the same feed special edition episode of the Free Cheese Podcast. You can reach us on all the things, Twitter, the website, email. It's at podcast@thefreecheese.com. You can ask us anything. You can ask us things about the Spoilercast that we may not be able to respond to in the regular podcast, but we'll figure out a good way to make sure that question gets on the air, to make sure that happens. We're on Twitter. The Free Cheese is at some Free Cheese. I am at MattyIce131. Joe is at The Free Cheese. This has been not exactly another episode, but close enough, of the Free Cheese Podcast. Joe, any last words?
Don't trust Chadley.
Don't trust Chadley. Thanks for listening, and we will see you later.